My name is Fred Sanchez, and today is Friday, September 21st, 2006, and we are at Andersonville National Historic Site in Andersonville, Georgia. And our interview today is with Mr. Karel Aster, he is right now from Captiva Island, Florida, and he was a former prisoner of war held by the Japanese in the Philippines, and he was actually a citizen of the Czech Republic, and he's got an interesting story to tell us today. First of all, Mr. Aster, please begin by telling us a little bit about where you lived and your occupation prior to coming down to the Philippines and being captured.
I originally came to the United States from the Czechoslovak Republic in 1939, and I was sent to America to assist in constructing and putting together the Czechoslovak exhibit and the exhibit of this Czech company at the New York World's Fair. And that was in 1939. At the same time, there was a World's Fair on Treasure Island in San Francisco, and we went there. And so I came to America in February 1939. In March of 1939, Hitler invaded the Czech, what remained after the Munich Agreement, invaded the rest of the Czech Republic and took it over. So I had a choice when I was through with my assignment of getting the exhibit set up for the World's Fair, which was in May or July. I had a choice of either going back to the occupied country by the Germans or try to find something to do and be able to stay in the United States. It so happened that the company that I worked for, this was a big Czech company that produced shoes all over the world, decided to start a shoe factory in Maryland, and they offered me a job there. So I went down there and I worked for almost a year, but then the Department of Labor found out that I didn't have any green card, I didn't have an immigration visa. I came here as a visitor to the World's Fair, so they said, sorry, we can't, you are here illegally. You'll have to do something about it. So again, this company I worked for, the name of the company is the Bata, B-A-T-A shoe company. They had more problems with other Czechs than with me of this nature, that they worked here in this new factory and didn't have a permit. So they decided, in my case, they decided to build a shoe factory in the Philippines. And they selected me and a group of other 6 people and sent us in February of 1941 to Philippines to build a shoe factory and open some shoe outlets there. So we did just that, and we started to work. We opened a small shoe factory. We opened a few shoe stores, and unfortunately December 8th came and Pearl Harbor came, and the next day Manila was bombed by the Japanese. We had a Czech group that was more or less organized by the honorary council there and by some Czech residents. There were about 30 or 40 Czech residents there. Some of them were refugees from the Nazis, some of them were businessmen, some of them were like we, trying to open a new manufacturing project. So we got together and we agreed that the ones that were able to get away from their because from their families or from their responsibilities, we offered our services as Czech volunteers to do whatever we could for the forces of General MacArthur, that was called USAFI, United States Army Far East. And our representative was very kindly received, and he said, yes, we will accept any help we can, and we will notify you. Did I?
No, that's fine. You're fine.
We will notify you as soon as the situation clears out. By then the Japanese landed in Lingayen Gulf and the invasion started, and on December 30th we got a notice from the army to assemble in the Army Navy Club those who were volunteering. Well, there was 14 of us who came to the Army Navy Club. It was during the day, and we were not sure what our duties would be or what was expected of us. And we were just told that please don't make any further phone calls, don't contact the outside world, and we will let you know what we shall do. So we waited there till after sunset, till dark, and then we were loaded in different military vehicles, the 14 of us, and proceeded till about 2 or 3 in the morning during the night, or under conditions of darkness, and we had no idea where we were going. Well, we landed about 2 o'clock in some what looked like we didn't know, outside we couldn't see much. Well, in any case, we landed in a place there. It was like a cafeteria or something, and they told us this is it, and we got. Then an officer came and greeted us and told us, gentlemen, you are on Bataan Peninsula, and you are going to be assigned tomorrow the duties that you are supposed to fill. So the next day...
Here's a question. So you went from being a civilian were you actually inducted into the armed forces?
At that time, according to our understanding, there was no law that permitted foreigners, just by joining the army, to become members of the army. That law was passed only sometimes in July of '42. By then we were already, it was too late for us. So there we were, and next day, first of all, we were issued khaki uniforms, and we swore allegiance to the United States, and then we were divided into 4 groups, and we were assigned to different motor pools, and our duty was to patrol the roads on Bataan, which the road through Bataan, it sort of created a triangle. Started in Mariveles, went to another place, and then across the area. It was a triangle, and we each were supposed to patrol one of those triangles. And so we were divided in group of 4. In my group there were 4, and we were assigned a big Mack wrecking truck, and we started to patrol the roads. And
And when you mean patrol, you were actually given weapons, rifles? And
no, we were not given any weapons.
You were not given any weapons?
No,
Okay.
we were told that we should not carry weapons, and or we were told that we would not be issued weapons. But and in the beginning, the patrolling there was a tremendous amount of incoming traffic into Bataan. All of a sudden, between the Filipinos, the Philippine Army, and Americans, there were about 70,000 people coming into Bataan, so you can imagine there was confusion on the roads. Many vehicles broke down. This was just a very narrow mountain road that we were patrolling. So there we either hooked up the vehicle to our trucks and took it to the motor pool to be repaired, or if the vehicle, as the time went on, there was heavy bombing. These roads were continuously bombed, and there was a lot of vehicles that were damaged by bombing and strafing and so on and so forth. So if in cases where we couldn't do much with the vehicle, we were supposed to take parts that were still usable, you know, and take them out of that, out of those vehicles, and take them into the motor pool to be used for something else. And that basically was our duty for the period while we were in Bataan, except one of the Czechs, who was a former employee of the Czech embassy in Tokyo, spoke fluent English, and he was selected to become an interpreter for what was called G2, I guess that's intelligence service. So he later he left us, and he went there to Mariveles. And that's the way it was going, and it was getting to be day after day worse and worse. The territory was getting more confined. The Japanese started to land at different points of Bataan, and there was no help coming from outside world, although our hopes were always very high. And as time went on, finally the surrender came in early April. The date is probably April 7th or 8th in this case. And at that point we were in one of the motor pools, you know, and actually we had to evacuate into the jungle because the Japanese discovered the pool from the sky and they were bombing it, so we had to move simply into the jungle. And we were told that the surrender order was issued, that we should destroy all the arms and destroy all the motor vehicles and whatever it could, so that they wouldn't fall in the Japanese hands, and that we should proceed to Mariveles, where we would be officially taken over by the Japanese.
So you never went to Corregidor then? You actually...
No.
No.
We have this group of 4 of us. We have decided to go to Mariveles, but we saw that the road was so unbelievably congested that maybe it would be easier for us to scale down the mountain to the coast and proceed along this rocky coast to Mariveles. And we have done that descent to the sea before, so we know how to get there. So we got into, so we proceeded on this trip, went to the coast, and when we went there, we realized, seeing what was going on, the corregidor didn't surrender. Well, we couldn't do anything at that point about it, but that was something, you know, really exciting for us. As we proceeded along the coast, we discovered some civilian who had a little cabin cruiser, and he was sitting there in a cave. He was a Chinese mestizo, and he was cussing and swearing, said that his boat broke down. Well, one of our men was a good mechanic, so we went to the boat and we managed to start engines. And then this Japanese came on board with us. He happened to know the minefield layout, and we proceeded along the coast and then made a turn, went to Mariveles. On the way along the coast, we must have picked up another 30 or 40 soldiers. Some of them, all of them in the same situation as we were. The boat was almost on the verge of tilting and going under.
Let me ask you a question. You said you picked up a Japanese.
No Japanese,
Oh,
Chinese.
Chinese, okay.
This guy was a Chinese.
Okay.
And Chinese mestizo, that means mestizo, you know. And so, thank God to our luck, because it was at night that we were traveling, otherwise the Japanese would have spotted us. We managed to get to Corregidor and land in Corregidor.
Oh, so you did make it to Corregidor.
We made that trip, yeah. And there, in Corregidor, we were basically not assigned any duties because the Corregidor was under full-day bombing, you know, and there was nothing much we could do. They moved us into a warehouse, really not into Malinta Tunnel, but into a warehouse which actually had a storage of food. And in that warehouse we did minor chores, basically, but nothing important, till the Japanese finally managed to sort of decimate Corregidor, and then in early May, first part of May, Corregidor was invaded. They invaded. They managed to land some tanks and whatnot, and they managed to get to the entrance of that Malinta Tunnel, which was the huge tunnel that where the hospitals were and all the headquarters. And General Wainwright had no other choice but to surrender. So we surrendered on that island, and after that we were taken prisoners. We were transported to Manila. We were part of a victory parade after they took us from Corregidor to Manila, all of us, you know. And we were marched into a prison in Manila. We were assembled there. The prison was called Bilibid. And from the Bilibid prison, they divided us into different groups and sent us different concentration, camps.
Let me ask you a question. Now, once you were captured, and did the Japanese realize that you were originally civilians of the Czech Republic? I mean, did that ever come out? Were you separated as a result of not technically being an American soldier?
We were not separated.
You were not separated.
And we were not, I think they interrogated only the maybe field officers of the higher ranks, but they didn't interrogate the very men. And they just simply treated us as part, you know, we had khaki uniforms, well, we were white, and nobody questioned us ever about who we were and what we were. And on top of that, we were not too interested in telling them
Right.
that we were Czech
Because
citizens,
there might have been a problem, right?
because the problem would have been the Czechs were occupied by the Germans, and the Germans called the Czech Republic the Protectorate of Bohemia and Moravia, and the Japanese technically considered us members of the German Empire. And if they would have established our backgrounds, we would have been treated as traitors to our own country. It was a strange
So
situation,
you could have been executed.
and we would have been probably executed. So it was to our advantage to shut up and not to.
you are,
not,
you are 100% correct. So.
and it was also. Thank God nobody asked us too many questions.
Well, let me ask you a couple of quick questions now. Once Corregidor fell and surrendered, and you kind of saw your first Japanese, and you know that you were going to be a prisoner, can you recall what your thoughts were? What was going through your head? As far as particularly the circumstances. Your circumstances are very unique. From everything that you told us. What was going through your head? Or even discussions with that group of four that were your friends.
Well, there was very little going through our head except survival. At that point, we had no idea what our future was. Absolutely not. And our primary immediate problem was always, at that point when we were still in Corregidor, let's see how we can survive. They herded us into a location on Corregidor, and they kept us there under open sky, without feeding us, without sanitary conditions, in circumstances that caused many people, of course, who were getting dysentery and getting
Now, is
things
this,
of
is
that
this still
sort.
in Corregidor or after you got to Philippines? Corregidor?
Yeah, we were held on Corregidor
For how long?
for about 2 weeks.
2 weeks.
Yeah. And only then were we transported into Manila and into the Bilibid prison, and then we were dispersed into different prison camps. In my case, I was with the group of Czechs I was with. I was sent to the Cabanatuan prison camp in central Philippines, and basically there we were working on a prison farm.
Let's go back to Bilibid. Can you give us a little bit of an idea of what life was like at Bilibid? Sort of like, what were the conditions there? Did you have barracks? What kind of food did they give you? How did you get treated?
I can tell you very little about Bilibid because we were there only relatively short time, few days.
2 days. Okay.
We were crowded into this compound, basically, sleeping on the floor, outside, inside, wherever we could. And we were there only a few days before we were transported to Cabanatuan.
Hey, let me ask you, there's a good distance between, if I remember correctly, there's a good distance between Bilibid and Cabanatuan. How did you get there? Were you transported in vehicles? Did you have to march? That's a good distance. We were transported in cattle trains. Yes. And we were transported to the city of Cabanatuan, and from there we were marched on foot to the camps. Yeah. Give us a little bit of the description of the trip. These were cattle carts, right? These were box cars.
Yeah.
How many? Was it pretty crowded? Did they stop to give you food and water? And what was the trip like? And how many days did it take?
It didn't take more than half a day.
Half a day.
We were terribly crowded, and we had always a lack of water. That was the big problem, lack of water. And of course we had shortage of food, yeah.
Had you all at this time, had you all heard about what happened to the guys that surrendered at Bataan, when Bataan fell, and the Bataan Death March?
No.
Did you all know about that?
At that point, we didn't know about it.
You didn't know about it.
At that point, we didn't know about it. We found out only, actually, when we came to Cabanatuan, a little time after our arrival there, these people from Bataan started to come in, and from Camp O'Donnell, and they told us about the horror stories. And of course, one of our Czech boys that was in that group has died in Camp O'Donnell. Another one managed to get away from out of the death march. He managed to get away, and it's sort of a mystery how he did this. He was in terrible shape. He was a former resident of Manila, a very, very successful businessman. And he suffered from, well, when he was in Manila, he had a heart attack, and then he suffered from beriberi, and he suffered from dysentery, and he was in terrible shape. And actually, he was he was so in such a miserable conditions he couldn't walk that they were taking him on this Bataan death march, actually in a truck. At one of the truck stops, at one of the stops that this march made, and this is his story, and I can verify it, and I can only tell you that it sounds absolutely fantastic, but he was lying on this truck bed, and there was a Japanese officer there that came to inspect his trucks, and he saw him, and according to him, he ordered the Japanese soldiers to take him off the truck, and he took him into a shed and actually left him there, and well, not he personally, but his assistants nursed this fellow back to where he was able, well, to live. And then they put him on another truck to Manila. At this point, he was in a little better shape, and as he was a long time, he lived by the time in Manila for 6 or 7 years. He somehow managed to escape from that truck that was taking him into Bilibid, and make way to people he knew. And he then became a very important member of the American guerrilla forces in Manila. He became an information officer. He managed to get hold of a shortwave radio. He listened to news. He was moving from place to place all the time, and he was publishing a news sheet. And he did that for almost till, well, he did it till close to, up till February 1944, really. And at that point, there was within the guerrillas, there was a traitor. And quite a few of these Manila residents, they were not guerrilla per se in the mountains. They were Manila residents who supported the resistance movement, sabotage, and things of that sort. They were identified by this inside, well, how would I say, traitor to that cause. And they were arrested, and they were all taken to Fort Santiago, and actually the Campe eventually executed, most of them, and they were beheaded and buried there. He managed, again, he got wind of this, and he managed to escape. And because of his knowledge of the conditions and also the knowledge of the local language and whatnot, he worked his way to eventually all the way to Mindanao, which was the southern island where American guerrillas were well organized and under the command of General Fertig were doing great service. And he worked his way and joined the guerrillas there, and that's where he ended the war. And he was then, because this was after these laws was passed, he was induced in the army. He was able to be inducted in the army, and he became a lieutenant. Survived the war and eventually came to America.
So that's how you met him and learned the story, because you talked to him, right?
Well, I learned all this long after the war, many, many years after the war. I didn't talk to him because he eventually settled in Mexico. But I tell you, I decided about, when my wife died 3 years ago, my children decided to keep me busy and asked me if I would write down my memoirs after 65 years. And I was very fortunate to get some help on this little island from some friends who were very experienced with computers and whatnot. And they helped me to contact the survivors, and
oh, that's wonderful.
of course I found out there were no survivors, but they helped me to contact the children and the wives of the survivors. And they also helped me to put me in contact with people in Manila that survived. You know, one of the most valuable contacts for me to restore sort of what happened was the son of Rear Admiral Chick Parsons. Chick Parsons was the American who was appointed by General MacArthur to be the contact and organizer of the resistance movement in the Philippines. He was a prominent American living in the Philippines before the war. He was a Panamanian consul of honorary consul of Panama, and because of that, he was able to go out with the Japanese allowed him to, with the other diplomats, to go through an exchange. And then when MacArthur found out, he knew MacArthur well, when MacArthur found out that he was back in America and anxious to serve, he called him to Australia and appointed him. And he was considered by MacArthur, in MacArthur's words, the greatest hero of the Philippine resistance there. Well, anyhow, I got in contact with his son, who was writing at that point history of his father's activities, you know.
That's wonderful.
Yeah, and I met his son. So that's the way I found out. But anyhow,
let's go back a little bit. Let's go back to Cabanatuan. I want to go back to Cabanatuan.
Yeah.
But now, did you stay in Cabanatuan for the remainder of the war, or did you go to other camps?
I stayed in Cabanatuan. We got there in 42. I think in 43 in summer, I was transferred out of Cabanatuan to build with a group, to build a airfield near south of Manila in Las Piñas. I was transferred to this Las Piñas camp, and we were building an airfield from scratch. Pick and shovels, you know, very primitive. And we were there in Las Piñas till finally the first air raids came, which came sometimes in September in 44, where the first American planes appeared and they started to bomb us. Well, shortly thereafter, actually, well, not so shortly, maybe a month later or so, because the Japanese realized, I think that's when General MacArthur landed in Leyte, the Japanese decided to get as many of the American POWs out of the country and ship them to Japan and use them as labor. And I was shipped out, I think it was in November, I was shipped out on one of what was then called, later on called the hell ships, which I didn't know at the time, but they certainly were hell ships. I was shipped out on one of these ships with a group of people out of Manila. First we survived, managed to get to Hong Kong. The ship managed to get to Hong Kong. And in Hong Kong, after a brief stay, about a week, where we had to help load the coal onto the ship, we were transported to Formosa, and for a brief period of time I was in a prison camp in Formosa for about a month, and then in January I was again picked up and transported to Japan. We landed in Moji and ended up in the province of Fukuoka, and we were assigned to a prison camp where the prisoners worked in the coal mines in Fukuoka. And I think the small community was called Omuta. And I was working in the coal mines there till finally they dropped a bomb in Nagasaki, and which was only 40 miles away. We were actually across the Nagasaki Bay on the island of Kyushu, across the bay from Nagasaki. They dropped the bomb, and of course we didn't know nothing that they dropped the bomb.
Were you all in the mines at the time of the dropping of the bomb?
We were in the gold mines, and we were, as I say, about 40 miles away, 50 miles away, and we just had no idea what happened. Nobody told us, and I think the Japanese themselves at that point didn't know what it was. Anyhow, they pulled us out of the coal mine, and this was, I think, August 15th. All of a sudden, during the shift, they pulled us out of the coal mine and marched us back to the camp, and we couldn't figure out what was going on. Kept us in the camp for a day or so, and then the camp commander called us all together. There was about 700 of us in that camp, and gave us a little speech in Japanese. And by then we all understood some Japanese, and I still remember, of course, today the end of the speech, and it was the words, "Senso yame, ima zembo tamadashi." The war is over. We are all friends again.
Yeah.
That was it.
After all you're going through.
And during the night, marched us back into our barracks, and during the night, the whole Japanese garrison disappeared. And in the morning, we woke up there, we were in the POW camp, we didn't know what the hell is going to happen.
Now, what was the name of this camp? Do you remember the name of the camp?
Yeah, Fukuoka camp number 17. Yeah.
And what would obviously the work, we know by interviews that we've done, the conditions of the work going into the mines, but what was life like in the camp after you, did you get up real early and went into the mines and stayed there all day and then came back? And what was life like,
Well, in the camp, the life was we usually got up about 4:30, 5 o'clock. We had to assemble for a count-off after breakfast, and after we pick up we got a little wooden box with rice, We were marched to the camp. We started to work probably around 7 o'clock. We worked till about 4, 5 o'clock in the underground, in the mine, different assignments. And then by the time we got home, was 6 o'clock we had dinner, and everybody was so exhausted we went to sleep. Yeah.
Now, did you get fed? Did you have a lunch period during the time that you were working in the mines, or did you just get fed in the morning and at night?
Well, we got fed in the morning, at night in the camp, and we got a wooden box with rice and some vegetables or something in it, you know, that we would take into the camp, into the mine with us, and we were eating. They gave us a little break at lunchtime for the Japan. We were continuously under Japanese or some supervision there. Some of the Japanese in the mine were poor, miserable civilians who had as little food as we did and suffered a lot and complained about the war, you know. But there were others that were real bastards, and most of those bastards were young kids that were assigned there. There were quite a few of them were from Taiwan, and some of them were from Korea, you know, and they were the ones that were beating on us.
And those were the guards that you had?
Yeah. The guards didn't go down into the mine with us. The guards stayed, the military, they just took us to they delivered us to this Japanese, basically the mines were owned by a Japanese company called Mitsui, which still exists. And they were turned over there, and then we were turned over to the sort of supervisors, you know, that went with us, and supervisors told us what to do, made sure that we worked hard, and we got a quota, basically. We had to dig out so much coal and load so much coal and get so much coal during our shift. And when we didn't do it, we were either punished or we had to stay late until we finished it.
How did they punish you?
Oh, beat us with a steak or something like that, you know.
Was there a real high mortality in Japan as far as, you know, dying?
In our camp, the mortality was relatively low compared to Philippines, you know, where the mortality was, or compared to the ships, you know. The mortality was relatively low. We had to work. They needed us, so they gave us enough rice and food, you know, to survive. Yeah. But certainly our food was much, I would say, much better in Japan than it was in Cabanatuan. Although we were working a rice farm, we were working a farm which was supposed to feed the POWs, but most of the farm products ended up in Japanese hands and for their people. There the starvation was terrible, of course. I went through all the problems that most of those other boys had. I had dysentery, I had I had dengue fever, I had pellagra, you know.
Did the Japanese give you any medical, you know, did they help you with any kind of medicine, either at Cabanatuan or in Japan?
Well, in Cabanatuan the situation was very strange. For somehow, you know, there were a lot of people that were trying to help us in Manila, including some, you know, like some of the Czechs that stayed behind, because they were these members of the Protectorate of Bohemia, part of the German Empire. They were allowed to just continue with their life and stay there without being incarcerated. Naturally, the conditions were also very difficult for them. They were all trying to help us, and there were people who were allowed to come in contact with the camp. They were Catholic priests. One of them was a famous hero, Father Buddenbrook, who eventually was beheaded by the Japanese. And he managed to come they allowed him to come and hold Holy Mass, you know. And he, with him, brought money that was collected, you know, and smuggled money to us. Later on, through other contacts, that we had, that they established. They managed to bring some medicines in, but all at a tremendous amount of, it was just by far not enough for all the prisoners, And the death rate there was, the first year the death rate was just unbelievable. Yeah. I wrote this whole, what I'm telling you is only sort of, I wrote it all down and I sort of prepared it for my kids. I don't know if you'd be interested in me.
We're going to have a copy of that because that's going to be great having that and having this interview.
I'll give you that. This is a copy that I brought for you. So you can.
Well, let me ask you a question now. Talk a little bit about the prison ships. How long, when did you get put in the prison ship, and how long did it take to go to get there? I think you said you got to Formosa first. Tell us a little bit about the prison ship.
Well, let's say that we were loaded on a prison ship in Manila. The name of the ship was Hokusan Maru. I have it from my investigations later on. I didn't know it at that time. And, well, I guess the story of the hell ships has been well documented, so I don't have to add too much to it, except that it was horror. They pushed us into these holes. They blocked the entrance of air there. There wasn't enough place to sit down even. We were laying on top of each other, We were you can imagine the hygienic conditions under these circumstances, because there was no toilet. They every so often they let down a bucket, where we were supposed to be able to relieve ourselves, but half of the people had dysentery, so there was no way of waiting for a bucket. I was this kind of horrible stuff all over the place. Plus some people, it affected their minds and they started to become, how should I say, went off the rock.
Right.
And they had to be held down by other men, because sleep was almost impossible. And I tell you, every morning there was maybe 20, 30 people dead, they died during the night. In the morning, once a day, they, haul these people out of these holes. Yeah. They never let us out of that hole between Manila and Hong Kong. And then trip between Manila and Hong Kong, I think, because of the conditions and continuous bombing, took about 20 days. And this normally would be a one-day trip. In other words, the ship would go out, take a short run. We were in a small convoy. At night, they would go into some cove along the coast of Luzon and hide, and then wait again for clear signal and go. And we were attacked, this convoy, I found out later again, I know we were attacked, we heard bombs dropped and whatnot, but I didn't know what it is. We were lucky. Out of the 12 ships, there only 4 survived. Only 4 came to Hong Kong. When we were in the Hong Kong harbor, there was an attempt by, I don't know, Chinese Americans. Airplanes came and tried to bomb us, but fortunately missed us, But there was only one attempt there. And we were transported from Hong Kong then to Formosa, and that was relatively a short trip of maybe 4 or 5 days, but we were totally, we were not in human condition anymore. When we came to Formosa, we had almost no water, and food was, well, you survive longer on water than you know, if you have water, then if you have food, but we had very little of either. And in Formosa, we were put into a really decent camp, I must say. I don't know why, but in Formosa, I was at that point with a group of only 3 Czechs. The other ones were on other ships. Incidentally, out of those 14, 7 have been 7 died on those hell ships being transported to Japan. 7, and from the other 7, some of them because of severe sickness remained in Bilibid and never made a trip. And out of the 10 that were shipped to Japan, there were only 2 survivors, myself and my friend. The rest of them all.
And you were in the same ship?
No, they shipped them, those Czechs, on different, yeah. The most casualties, as far as the Czechs were concerned, and even the Americans were on, or I think it was called Orioko Maru, and the other one was, and then there was another name, Brazil Maru, I think. They were also lost lives when they were in Formosa and when they were being transferred from Formosa up to Japan. Yeah. There is the Czechs, out of the Czechs, 7 of them after the war, some of them posthumously, were awarded with the Medal of Freedom. I wasn't there, one among them, because the Medal of Freedom was awarded to these 7 Czechs for rescuing a rice mill during the Bataan action. They were sent into no man's land. They disassembled a rice mill and brought it back to Bataan, and it was very important because there was a rice harvest in Bataan, but there were no rice mills. And they were able to process this rice mill and contribute to the tremendous shortage of food there. And for that, 7 were awarded the Medal of Freedom. Out of the 7, 2 actually survived and received the medal when they came to America. And the rest of them didn't survive, so the medal was never really issued, except in one case, one of the children of one of these men who perished there. She saw her father last time when she was 1 year old, in 1941, when he went into Bataan. She survived the war in the Philippines and eventually came to America and with her mother and settled in California. And when I started to research all this, I got in touch with her mother and she got so immensely interested in this case of her father that she almost took it on herself to, to do a tremendous amount of research. She got in touch with the military authorities. She got in touch with the son of our American commander, Colonel Quinn. His son was also in the military, and she managed to arrange that her mother and she would get the Medal of Freedom issued to her posthumously. And the army was extremely nice, and they have, this happened only last spring, they organized a fantastic presentation in California, and they, during that presentation, with all the military honors and bands and whatnot, and a lot of people, they have turned over the medal to this lady. And actually, you know, the POWs from Bataan have a newspaper called the Kwan. You probably get it. Next issue of the Kwan will carry the story.
Oh, that's wonderful. We're going to have to look for
Yeah,
that.
that this lady put together about her father and about his fortunes and misfortunes of all these checks. Yeah.
Well, let me ask you, so we can kind of wrap this up. We're running a little here on time. What happened at the end of the war? How did you get? You said that the guards, they were basically gone overnight, and you were left by yourselves. How did that at the end? How did you get out of Japan? Where did you go? How did you get back to the States?
Well, the Japs left us. So first of all, we were searching for food, and we found out that there was a tremendous warehouse full of Red Cross food right in the camp that was never given to us. And we also found out that they left you know, the guardhouse, they left quite a few arms there in the guardhouse, side arms, you know, and so on and so forth. So there we were in this camp, and we had a lot of food. And at the beginning we didn't dare to come out, but pretty soon, you know, it started, I think, with the Japanese children coming to the edge of to the fence of the prison camp begging. And, you know, you see a child begging and you have food. At this point we had a lot of food, so we gave them something, you know. Pretty soon the grown-ups came to the camp. So we had a feeling that we were pretty safe. So some of us started to even venture from the village, from the camp into the village. Everybody was very polite, everybody was bowing, you know, and we felt completely secure and safe, and we were just waiting for something to happen. Finally, and I think it took about 2 weeks, or maybe less, the American planes discovered the camp. And they dropped us food, they dropped us clothing, but no messages what they're going to do with us. The first American that appeared in the camp was a newspaperman for Chicago Daily News. His name was Weller, and actually his son is now writing the memoirs of his father, who was the first one who managed to get to the camp, and he's the one that assembled us and told us all the world news about Roosevelt being dead, about Truman being president. Of course, we didn't know who Truman was, about the atomic bomb and whatnot. And then few days after that, the Marines came, got us into the train, took us to Nagasaki. We saw all the destruction and everything still, loaded us on a ship, took us to Okinawa, sorted us out between critical cases and those who had flown to America, and sorted us out also on basis of our status. But most of us, Americans and others, were shipped to Manila, where we went through a replacement depot, where we were interrogated and sorted out, and our status of the Czechs, and there were only, as I say, 2, was established that we were, our status was established as civilian employees of Department of War. And we were actually on a payroll all through the war, except we never got anything. And we got paid, we were supposed to get paid $50 a week. And we got, when we finally were in Manila, they issued us a check, which was a wonderful thing. And then they say, well, thank you very much, goodbye. And I went to the American embassy and told them that as a Czech, I would have a difficult time returning to my country because by then they were occupied by the communists, by the Russians, you know. So I applied for immigration visa to the United States, and on the basis of all my service and whatnot, after 5 months, the immigration visa finally came through for me, and I was able to come to America and settle here, and I have lived happily ever after.
Well, that's wonderful. This is about to end here. Mr. Aster, let me tell you that it's a wonderful, absolutely wonderful story. I'm so glad that we contacted you. I think your kids are going to, grandkids and everybody going to love that you recorded this. And of course, with this right here that you're giving us, this is a wonderful story that we'll be able to put in our collection, you know, that will be here for, you know, for prosperity, for researchers to be able to research this. So thank you so much.
Okay. Now I would like to see